So The Pianist is based on a true story of a Polish famous concert pianist during the 40s. When the Nazis invaded Poland, he was forced into a ghetto with the rest of his family. Eventually, everyone he knew basically was taken to concentration camps except for him, and he successfully hid for most of the war, but in order to stay safe, he has to do like some pretty extreme things. One of the hardest parts of the film for me was where it showed from a family that was having dinner. There was a really old man in a wheelchair, and they were a Jewish family, and the Nazis came into their house and they grabbed the guy in the wheelchair and threw him off the balcony, like a 2-story building. And probably the ending when he's hiding and he hasn't eaten in days and days and days, and he finds a can of food but he can't open it, and he is going crazy trying to open the can. Those two things just sort of showed like the extreme sort of realities that people really went through and experienced, and at the end of the war he survives and he starts playing piano again, and the idea that a human being can go through this much and come out okay kind of really affected me, and I thought that's what made it a very powerful film.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
Why don't you?
Brokeback Mountain was about two guys who decided to have a summer job as cowboys, and they ended up falling in love. I liked the story because it was two males, and you don't see a lot of movies that are popular that show that type of romanticism, and I think it's very important. I liked the story because it talked about oppression and like what it can do to a person. The scene I liked the most was with Ennis, and when he was married and he had his children and Jack came to visit him. It just showed how, you can try to fit someone into a specific stereotype, but in the end, love is love.
When you coming home?
Soon.
I saw Requiem for a Dream pretty recently. It was very much about drugs, and I didn't really realize that going in. It was really interesting to watch that film's take on addiction, especially considering the fact that I've encountered recovering addicts. Seeing a sort of Hollywood take that seemed to me pretty, it was reasonable. What really stuck with me the most was definitely the main character having his arm really infected. That was just very traumatizing, the fact that not only was it infected, but then his response to having such a mutilated, completely mangled infection on his arm was to inject himself with more heroin in the same spot that was obviously just decaying and rotting from his body. He was brushing it off, and his impulse was to just inject himself with more of his drug. It was just so gruesome, kind of. It's definitely a very good film to show people to don't do drugs, because it's kind of terrifying. It gets into your head and you just feel so strangely, not necessarily bad, but really you feel for the characters a lot. And so I thought it was a pretty interesting experience. I definitely recommend it to a lot of people. The look that it gives you on how it can affect anybody, really brutal and very widespread, is very interesting, I think, and that's not something I think you're going to find in many other films.
I could have got more out.
So Schindler's List is about Nazi Germany, especially, and it's particularly about the concentration camps. And there's this guy, and his name is Schindler, and he runs a steel factory, and it primarily produces goods for the war, and he keeps going into these camps because he's part of the Nazi party. He's kind of horrified by what he sees, and he gets this idea to hire the Jewish people to work at his factory to keep them alive. So he makes a list of all the people that he wants to take to his factory because he doesn't agree with the Nazi Party, so he tries to save as many Jews as he can. The most memorable part for me was definitely the ending. It is beyond sad because he saved so many people by selling like gold and stuff like that so he could pay the Nazis money to take more people out of the camps. And at the end, the war is almost over and he's trying to escape to not be prosecuted or tortured or captured. And all the Jewish people that he saved were like, you need to go, you need to go. And he's just running around picking up things that he owns. And he's like, I could have saved more with this ring. I could have saved more if I sold this car. And he was so upset that he even let any people die. It was just really sad because he had already done really good things and he was still so haunted by the people that he couldn't save. Also, the ending was memorable because after the movie ended, they showed real people that worked in his factory going to his grave, and it's a Jewish custom to lay a stone on the grave as a sign of respect, and they all went to his grave and they were just one by one, everyone was laying these stones on his grave, and it was just very sad, very emotional and powerful.
My movie might be one of the only ways Zachary could see and get to know his father. So I pointed the van east toward Newfoundland and set off on a quest to bring a man back to life.
The most sad and depressing movie I've ever seen in my life is called Dear Zachary. It's a true life documentary made by this guy whose best childhood friend, was killed by his girlfriend. And after he was murdered, they found out the girlfriend was pregnant with his kid. So this friend decides to go across the country talking to the friends, family and people he's known throughout his life. So the son will remember his dad not as this guy that was killed, but as an actual person. It's really touching, the amount of sentiment behind it. It unfolds and it turns out that the woman who still has custody of the son kills herself and the son by jumping into the ocean, and it's the most heartbreaking thing you can possibly imagine. The people, especially the parents of the guy who was killed in the first place, are the nicest people you can possibly imagine, and you just feel absolutely awful for all the things that they've been put through. That's the saddest movie I've ever seen in my life, and I cry every time. If you want me to point out the point where I cry every time without doubt, it's when they interview one of the first responders to the scene of the girlfriend and the son's murder, and one of the responders says that since the baby is technically forensic evidence, they would wrap him in a plastic bag, but instead the investigator used a blanket and kept him as far away from the mother as possible, since she was an awful person. They do not circle around the subject that this girlfriend was the worst person you could possibly imagine, but I cry every single time they bring up that scene in the movie. Just the fact that so many people messed up along the way, how the government failed these people and how this should not have happened at all, is really, really sad.